I never thought I'd be that person. The one everyone is filming on their phones while security drags my entire family off a plane in handcuffs. But here we are. My sister was screaming, my mother was in tears, and I was just sitting there, numb, wondering how a simple family vacation turned into a federal offense and a viral nightmare. Was I wrong for being the one who finally snapped and called the police on my own flesh and blood while we were 30,000 feet in the air? Or would you have sat there in silence while they put everyone's lives at risk? I need you to be honest with me because my family hasn't spoken to me since that day, and the internet is currently tearing us apart. It all started 6 months ago when my parents decided we needed one final family trip before my sister, Sarah, moved across the country. Now you have to understand my family dynamic to realize why this was a bad idea from the jump. My parents have always enabled Sarah. She's the golden child, who never grew up even at 26 years old. She has this explosive temper and a sense of entitlement that could fill a stadium. Then there's my brother, Mike, who just goes along with whatever she says to avoid the drama. I'm the black sheep because I actually set boundaries. For this trip to Hawaii, my parents insisted on paying for everyone's tickets, but they booked us all in economy. Sarah, of course, threw a fit the moment we got to the airport because she wanted first class. She spent the entire check-in process belittling the gate agents, demanding upgrades that didn't exist, and making a scene before we even cleared security. I told her to knock it off, but my mom just whispered, "Let her be, she's stressed about the move." That's been the soundtrack of my life. Let her be. By the time we actually boarded the plane, the tension was vibrating. We were seated in 2 rows, one behind the other. Sarah was next to a stranger, a quiet older man who just wanted to read his book. Within 10 minutes of sitting down, Sarah decided she didn't like how he was breathing too loudly, and started huffing and puffing, shoving her elbow into his space. My parents, sitting right across the aisle, did nothing. They just looked at their magazines like their daughter wasn't being a complete menace. I was sitting behind her, watching the back of her head, praying she would just fall asleep. But then, the drink service started, and that's when the spark hit the powder keg. Sarah ordered a double vodka, then another, and then a third. The flight attendant, a very professional woman who was clearly exhausted, eventually told her she had to cut her off for safety reasons. Sarah didn't just get angry, she went nuclear. She started screaming about how she paid for the flight, even though she didn't, and how the flight attendant was just a waitress in the sky. My dad tried to calm her down, but she shoved him away, and Mike just put his headphones on. The entire cabin was dead silent, staring at us. I felt the hot sting of embarrassment crawling up my neck. The stranger next to her tried to get up to go to the bathroom, and Sarah literally blocked his path, refusing to move her legs, telling him he could hold it, because she wasn't moving for anyone. It was getting dangerous. The lead flight attendant came over and gave her a final warning, stating that if she didn't sit down and be quiet, they would have to divert the plane. My mother started crying, begging the flight attendant not to ruin our vacation. But Sarah wasn't stopping. She stood up in the aisle and started filming the crew, screaming that they were harassing her. At this point, the pilot's voice came over the intercom telling everyone to take their seats immediately. We were halfway over the ocean, and the atmosphere was toxic. I looked at my parents, who were now arguing with the flight attendants too, defending Sarah's right to be upset. It was a complete family meltdown in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. To make matters worse, my brother Mike finally took his headphones off, not to help, but to start filming the flight attendants himself, claiming they were violating Sarah's civil rights. The level of delusion was staggering. The passengers around us were visibly terrified. One woman a few rows up was clutching her child, and another man was trying to signal the crew for help. Sarah began kicking the seat in front of her, which belonged to a young woman who was clearly trying to ignore the chaos. When that woman finally turned around and asked Sarah to please stop, Sarah didn't just yell. She reached over and grabbed the woman's hair. That was the moment I felt the oxygen leave the room. My father, instead of pulling Sarah off, started yelling at the woman for provoking his daughter. I could see the flight attendants communicating on their interphones, their faces pale and set in grim lines. I knew the protocol. I knew we were seconds away from a full-scale intervention. I leaned over and begged my mom to grab Sarah, to pull her into her seat. to do anything to stop the descent into madness, but she just shoved my hand away and hissed that I was being unsupportive. It was like being in a fever dream where everyone is insane except you. The situation escalated when the senior flight attendant attempted to use a calm, de-escalation voice, which only seemed to insult Sarah more. Sarah began pacing the narrow aisle, bumping into the food cart, and at one point, she actually tried to push her way toward the cockpit door, screaming that she wanted to speak to the captain. The fear in the cabin was palpable now. People were whispering about air marshals, and some were even crying. My father was now standing in the aisle as well, acting as a human shield for Sarah, preventing the crew from getting close to her. He was shouting about his constitutional rights, completely ignoring the fact that we were in a pressurized cabin over the Pacific Ocean where the rules of a backyard barbecue don't apply. Mike was still filming, laughing under his breath like this was all some great joke for his social media followers. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a hostage situation where my own family was holding 300 people's peace of mind captive. I looked at the flight attendant's face. She was trembling. She had a family to go home to, a job to do. And here she was, being physically intimidated by a man twice her size and a woman half her age with a drinking problem. I realized that if a medical emergency happened, or if we hit severe turbulence while they were all standing and fighting, people would get seriously hurt. My parents' enabling had reached its final, most dangerous form. They weren't just protecting their daughter. They were actively participating in a riot. So, that is the nightmare I was trapped in. My family was spiraling out of control. The flight crew was reaching their breaking point, and I was the only one seeing how badly this was going to end. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened next, and how I ended up being the one to end the family vacation forever, I want you to pause right now and comment below. If your family was acting this way and putting the entire flight at risk, would you defend them because they're blood, or would you side with the crew? What would you have done in my shoes? Because what I did next changed my relationship with my parents forever. I realized then that if I didn't act, something much worse was going to happen. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and used the in-flight Wi-Fi to message a friend of mine who works for the airline's corporate security. But more than that, I stood up and looked the lead flight attendant in the eye. I told her, I am with this party, and I am telling you right now they are not going to stop. You need to do what you have to do to keep this plane safe. My mother gasped, calling me a traitor, and Sarah actually tried to swing at me. That was the final straw. The crew didn't divert. They had the air marshals on board step in. It turned out there were two plainclothes marshals who had been watching the whole thing. They moved in so fast it was a blur. One of them, a tall man who had been sitting 3 rows back, moved with a level of precision that immediately signaled he wasn't just a regular passenger. He identified himself, but Sarah, in her drunken, entitled haze, tried to spit on him. In an instant, she was pinned against the bulkhead. My father lost his mind, screaming that they were assaulting an innocent girl. And he actually lunged at the marshal. My brother Mike tried to grab the other marshal's arm, and that's when the zip ties came out. The sound of those plastic ties clicking shut was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mother was hysterical, wailing as if someone had died, while the rest of the plane sat in a shocked, heavy silence. The air marshals were incredibly professional, but they weren't taking any chances. They moved my family to the very back of the plane, away from the other passengers, keeping them under guard. I stayed in my seat, staring straight ahead at the seat back in front of me, feeling the eyes of every single passenger on me. I could hear my sister's muffled screams from the back of the aircraft, and my father's deep voice shouting about lawsuits and knowing people in high places. The pilot came back on the intercom, his voice vibrating with an anger he was barely concealing, informing us that due to the severe passenger disturbance, we were being redirected back to our origin point under escort. The reality of the situation began to sink in for the rest of the family then. The vacation was over, and the consequences were just beginning. For the next 2 hours of that flight, I sat in total isolation. No one spoke to me, and I spoke to no one. When the wheels finally touched the tarmac, the plane didn't go to a gate. It stopped on a remote taxiway, and the stairs were brought out. I watched out the window as 4 police cruisers and an ambulance surrounded the aircraft. The police boarded and escorted my sister, father, and brother off first. They were all in plastic restraints. My mother followed, not in cuffs, but escorted by 2 officers, her face a mask of ruined mascara in pure fury. When it was finally my turn to exit, the lead flight attendant stopped me. She took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and simply said, "Thank you for being the one to do the right thing. You probably saved a lot of people today." I just nodded, walked down those metal stairs, and felt the cold air hit my face. I was taken to a separate room in the terminal for questioning by the FBI and airport police. I sat in a cold, fluorescent-lit room for 4 hours, recounting every single detail of the descent into madness. I told them about the first drink, the second, and the third. I told them about how my father had physically blocked the aisle to prevent the crew from doing their safety duties. I felt like a witness at a crime scene because that's exactly what it was. Every word I spoke was a nail in the coffin of my relationship with my family, but I couldn't lie. I couldn't protect them anymore. While I was in that room, the local news was already picking up the story. My phone was blowing up with notifications. My cousins, my aunts, my former high school friends. Everyone was sending me the same video of Sarah being wrestled into zip ties. The internet had already dubbed her the Mile High Menace, and my father was being called the enabler-in-chief. It was humiliating. After I was cleared to leave, I walked through the terminal with my hoodie pulled up, feeling like a fugitive. My parents were released on bail the next day, but Sarah is facing federal charges for interfering with a flight crew, and my father is being looked at for assaulting a federal officer. They lost the money for the trip, they've lost their reputation, and they've told me I'm no longer part of the family because I snitched on them. My brother Mike sent me a series of texts calling me every name in the book, telling me I'm dead to them. He even tried to claim that he was documenting the abuse of the marshals, but the police confiscated his phone as evidence against our sister. They think I should have stayed loyal, even if it meant the plane had to make an emergency landing or someone got hurt. They actually had the nerve to suggest that if I had just distracted the crew, Sarah could have calmed down on her own. The level of enabling is so deep they can't even see the crime they committed. I've spent the last week watching the video of us go viral. I see myself in the background of some of those clips, just sitting there, looking like a statue while my family implodes. People in the comments are calling my sister Airplane Karen, and making memes out of my mother's crying face. Part of me feels a twinge of sadness, but most of me just feels a profound sense of relief. For 24 years, I have been the one fixing their messes, apologizing for their outbursts, and smoothing things over. But you can't smooth over a federal crime. You can't apologize your way out of endangering a flight. My father lost his job because his company saw him fighting an air marshal on the nightly news. My mother is on anti-anxiety medication and refuses to leave the house because the neighbors are whispering. And Sarah? Sarah is looking at real jail time and a lifetime ban from almost every major airline. They blame me for all of it. They say if I hadn't spoken up, if I hadn't told the attendant to take action, they would have just gotten a warning and gone on to enjoy their beach vacation. They are completely blind to the fact that their own behavior caused the crash of our family. I've had to change my phone number twice. My parents even tried to show up at my apartment to scream at me through the door about how I've destroyed the family legacy. What legacy? A legacy of being the loudest, most obnoxious people in the room? A legacy of thinking the rules don't apply to us? If that's the legacy I destroyed, then I'm proud of it. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the fallout, and she told me something that really stuck. You didn't break the family, you just stopped holding the broken pieces together. It's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy they wrote themselves. I was just the one who finally read the ending out loud. I've realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions, even if it hurts you in the process. I am finally free of the let her be mentality. I am finally my own person, even if that person is currently being disowned by everyone I grew up with. At the end of the day, family is supposed to be your safe harbor, but when the harbor starts trying to sink the ship, you have to jump off. I chose the safety of 300 strangers over the ego of 3 people who share my DNA, and I have to live with that. I've changed my locks, and I'm looking into a restraining order against Sarah once she's out of processing. because she's already made it clear she wants revenge. She actually sent a message through a mutual friend saying that the moment she's free, she's coming for me. It's a sad state of affairs when you're more afraid of your sister than you are of the legal system. But that's my reality now. I'm moving forward, one day at a time, knowing that I can sleep at night because I didn't let my family's entitlement hurt innocent people. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by standing up to my family, and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories about people finally reaching their breaking point. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments. Was I a traitor, or was I the only sane person on that plane? I'll see you all in the next story.